Hi, friend. Ashley here. Welcome to the Unlock Your Dream podcast. I'm here to guide you along your journey to unlocking your dreams to achieve the best life that you can imagine possible. From my journey in medicine as a PA and then some in the corporate world, I always still desired a little bit more out of life. It wasn't until I met some people who had seen their dreams realized that it occurred to me that maybe, just maybe, mine could come true too. Come along with me as we get to know some of these friends of mine and hear their stories of unlocking their dreams. Hey, friend, we are back this week with Pate from Daysie Syrups and so incredibly grateful. So she earned her undergraduate degree, just a little bit of background on her, in advertising from the University of South Florida, and integrated marketing was a master's degree from West Virginia University. And on top of that, has a graduate certificate in executive leadership and nonprofits from the University of Florida. So you're dealing with a very seasoned, incredible lady here. And then in 2016, also on top of that, she was a recipient of Charleston 40 Under 40, not a small thing in any means. And now she
Mhm.
is the co-founder and current board member for the Pay It Forward Charleston and a member of the Charleston Junior League. We're here today to talk a lot as well about her incredible mastermind to create Daysie Syrups, which has saved all of us from 2020 on. And so I'll let you share a little bit about your story and anything you want to share about Daysie and kind of how we got to having these incredible syrups.
Sure. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I think whenever you sort of hear things back, you're like, oh yeah, all those things did happen once upon a time, so many years ago. So yes, this is actually my third time living in Charleston, South Carolina, because my husband was an officer in the Navy, and we chose to move to Charleston when he got out of the military, and we absolutely love it. And I say that because Charleston is really a part of the foundational story of Daysie. This city has been incredibly kind to me as an entrepreneur. It's full of really fierce and fearless female entrepreneurs who are doing incredible things alongside me. And I feel very, very lucky to have gotten to start Daysie here, and to continue the path of Daysie here in Charleston. It's a really creative community. And I always say that, like, I spent time living in a larger metropolitan city. I lived in San Francisco prior to starting Daysie. And I truly believe that I could not have started in San Francisco and received the sort of reception of kindness and warmth and sort of like sharing of knowledge that happened in Charleston. And that's just like, that's not me trying to knock another city. It's really just trying to like raise the profile of Charleston of really being this wonderful place that fosters creativity, and supports entrepreneurism, and that's how I met you. So, yeah, I started Daysie, which is a line of certified organic simple syrups for coffee and occasions. And I started it because I was building my at-home coffee bar, which I'm in my kitchen right now, and if I turned my phone around, you would see it. Um, but having time, we spend time in Seattle as well because my husband was in, like I mentioned, in the Navy, and it was there that we sort of like fell in love with coffee culture.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's like the birthplace of Starbucks, but beyond that, like really beautiful micro roasters, sort of in the Pacific Northwest that we started to love. And so we were building that at-home coffee bar during COVID, like a lot of people were doing, sort of like at-home projects. And we were ordering, an espresso machine and milk, like Oatly, right? Like Oatly was having this really big moment then. And I went to pull down my syrup for my coffee because my husband calls me a frou-frou coffee drinker,
Mhm.
which just means that I will never take my coffee black. And so I pulled down the syrup and I just sort of turned over the label just to sort of see what was in it. Like, why I hadn't done that in the past, I don't really know. But maybe part of that was just the wave of alternative milks sort of hitting, and me being aware of like these other coffee components. And when I couldn't pronounce half the ingredients, I thought, this is so strange. Um, and then it sort of snowballed from there. And I can share so many of the like pieces, but it started with a, I think oftentimes what happens when you create a product is like you're looking for a pain point for yourself. And
Yeah.
so that was this pain point for me, which was, how do I have this beautiful cup of coffee in my own home and feel good about the ingredients that I'm putting into that cup.
Mhm.
And so that was really the just first light bulb of that was like a that's interesting. And
Yeah.
then sort of going from there along this journey, which I'm happy to share more about. But I think that's something that I just share because I spent time working in startups in San Francisco in consumer packaged goods. That's my background. So I was used to sort of exploring holes in the markets for other brands. And so I sort of had this like intrinsic training in my mind to think about this moment in a different way. Whereas I think some people, if you're just in your day to day, you might not pause in that moment. You might just like, oh, that's weird. And then you just sort of move on with your day. Right. But I think in entrepreneurism, or if you're thinking about being an entrepreneur, or, and or have an idea, right? Like it's really paying attention to these moments in time, and finding that little hole in the market. So that's how Daysie really started, was this that's interesting moment.
I love that. There's so much good stuff in there. I heard a quote recently that was the problem becomes the solution, which sounds like for you. And you're right. We pull these things down and we don't often turn them over to be like, what's actually in this. And so I love that. Yeah, I would probably be a frou coffee drinker with you too, especially after a good coconut coffee daisy. I am here for it. And also in the fall, I'm really hoping that you bring back the pumpkin spice because our family went through quite a bit of it. Because again, it's like you just jump on the PSL culture and no one reads what's in all these coffee shop ingredients versus I know I can pull yours down. And last year I had a newborn at home and then previous to that was pregnant. So, the things that you're putting in your body, it matters, so thank you is all that we can
Yeah,
say.
totally,
The
totally.
time to take that pause and say, hey, what can I do to solve this instead of, well, I'll just let someone else fix it or, just keep moving on, which I think you said, like a lot of people want to be an entrepreneur and it looks really classy in 2024 going into Daysie having this incredible moment. But in 2020, you had a lot of problems to solve, even starting back from then. I was thinking as I was reading this, and actually, in all the time that we spent together, I don't know, where did the name Daysie come from?
That's a great question. This is actually a really great thing because it allows me to just unpack something that maybe some listeners aren't aware of. And again, let me just back up because I do want to tell you where the name came from. But my first job after getting my master's degree, I was living in San Francisco, and I started working for the CEO of a company called NatureBox, which was at the height of the subscription box services. And my job was an executive assistant to the CEO. And
Wow.
I say that very humbly to say, like, I took that job. First of all, I was competing against like Harvard and Stanford graduates, and that was just not me. But the second part of it was that I knew that I could get like an additional MBA sitting next to a CEO of a company, right? That was in a startup phase.
Good.
So I learned so much during this process that really helped lay the foundation for Daysie. So I always like to just tell people, like, if you didn't have an experience like this where you could have learned these things, right, like on the job, like something super, super new to you, highly encourage people to read books. And I didn't not read books too. So I would highly recommend looking at sort of like top business books, like um, LinkedIn founder Reid Hoffman wrote a great book. The founder of Nike wrote a really great book. So there's these books out there that teach you sort of these like things of entrepreneurism
Mhm.
that aren't just like abstract ideas. They're really concrete moments. And so
Yeah.
this moment of naming my brand, Daysie, was one of those concrete moments that I just happened to know about, having sat next to a CEO, but that
Mhm.
you would probably know if you read these books. So
Okay.
I just like, people always say, like, well, can you, maybe I should introduce myself, or I need to go out to these places. I'm like, start with the resources that are free, like
Mhm.
online libraries, right? Where you can just rent these books for free, and learn as much as you can from books, or podcasts too, of course, podcasts these days, like yours as well. So back to the naming of Daysie. I knew that when I started Daysie, I wanted to build a company that I would build, scale, sell. And I knew that from the very beginning when I had the idea. I didn't want a cottage brand where I was selling at farmers markets and that was maybe as big as it was going to get. I really had my idea of creating a consumer product that lived on shelves that would be acquired by another company in the future. And so with that, you have to have a trademark name.
Mm-hmm.
And so the trademark is the stickiest part of the entire process. Like, you can get your social media handles and you can figure out your website, right? Like, and the sort of quirky ways you go about getting all of those things. But to get a trademark, you have to have something that's incredibly unique in that category. And so I say that by letting you know, like, Delta faucets also exists against Delta Airlines. The consumer will not confuse the two because they're in two totally different categories.
Sure.
So you have to find a name that is completely unique in your category. And when you're going through sort of like a word association game, which is usually how a lot of like branding sort of brainstorms start, which is like, okay, let's like brain dumps. You have like a whiteboard and you're like, who were all the most important people to you? What are your favorite flowers? Like, what are your favorite colors? Like, which street did you grow up on? What are all
Yeah.
the words associated with coffee? What are all the words associated with sugar? Right? So you're sort of just like brain dumping.
Yes.
And a part of that brain dump was that my wedding flowers were Gerber daisies. And I liked the idea. I kept saying things like starting your day, ending your day, sort of like helping you get through your day, owning your day. So there was like, it was like all these days.
Yes.
And so when my branding agency that I was doing this exercise along, they're like, you keep saying day, but you have this word on your board and it's Daysie. And so is there a way where we could spell it to where you would capture the word day and that sort of reflection of like Daysie was made for the daytime versus
Yes.
maybe putting on your cocktail bar. I wanted Daysie to be something that you left on your counter because you were going to use it every day.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that to say, the unique spelling also helps you get a trademark.
Yeah.
And Daysie was not necessarily a word associated with coffee. So I wasn't finding like coffee cafes named Daysie or bean roaster companies called Daysie, right? So with the help of a lawyer, we did trademark search and were able to sort of determine before we submitted the paperwork that we thought we could get a global trademark on the name. So
Wow.
that is how the name started. Wedding
There's so much.
flowers turned lawyer saying this will work.
That's amazing. There's a lot of good stuff in there because I agree. People think, you just come up with your Instagram handle and you're off the road. But I love, even for someone that's even thinking about starting out in 2024, that's a great place to start. Just get a whiteboard out and do your brain dump and figure out what's important to you. Because there's a lot of beautiful things in that. And if you're planning to scale and sell, it's something that can't be, maybe your namesake or whatever else you were thinking it could be. So that's really cool. It makes it even more special. And I'm glad we keep it on our counter now. It is part of our whole day. So I
Thank
love
you,
to
Ashley. That's sweet.
about I think a lot of people I've run into, we kind of come from this generation that have told us, go to school, get good grades, get the job. And it was like, you just keep adding letters to the end of your name and that's how you make it. But I love what you said about connections and books that are out there. And I can totally relate to that. My entrepreneur side all came from networking connections. And then it is amazing the MBA. And I don't usually that you can get some great connections for you or with someone that you got to sit by and kind of be mentored by. But what were maybe some of the connections along the way that have really helped shape your entrepreneurship journey?
I was, again, very lucky. So after NatureBox, I took a role with DripDrop. I was employee number 4 or 5 there.
Wow.
And in San Francisco, you're really sitting in we were like in a warehouse district, right? Like with concrete walls. And it was like, but in such a good way because you were all in the thick of it. And so I got to hear so many calls that even though my role was marketing, I was hearing operations, I was hearing formulation, I was hearing fundraising because we all sat in this room. And so very lucky in that regard. And my boss at the time, um, she and our CEO, this is so crazy how this worked out. Our CEO of Drip Drop at the time and my boss, he was the former CEO of Pete's Coffee, and
Wow.
she was the former VP at Pete's Coffee.
Wow.
So in my back pocket, just like because of this like job that I had. And that's just, there's skill and then there's luck. And that's just one of those things that ended up being really lucky. So Debbie is her name. And Debbie was the person that I was sending like my business plan to, my branding book, having very long conversations about, retail and margin and colors and names. And so very, very lucky there. That being said, so like the luck is on one side.
Mm-hmm.
I also have no shame in my game, and I emailed and DM'd many of people. And I will say, do what I did in that emailing people and DMing people and LinkedIning, that's a great way. The thing that I learned coming out of that I would tell somebody to do now is to be really specific on your ask.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously now sitting on the other side of it and learning through these people is like, they're crazy running their own business, but they want to be helpful, but they
Mm-hmm.
want to be like tangibly helpful. And so my very first conversation that I had when I was sort of like doing that cold outreach was a guy named Jason here in Charleston. He's the CEO of New Primal, which
Okay.
is they're like the number one condiment brand and seasoning brand at Whole Foods.
So
And
good.
he happened to go to my undergrad, my alma mater. And so my LinkedIn message to him was like, to my fellow alum, I'm really hoping I can pick your brain about this idea. And I sort of gave some, like, here's the overlaps I see between our businesses. The luck was that he said yes. But what I left with after that, not after our conversation, he's like, Tara, like, I'm always happy to help you. From now on, we can skip the pleasantries. Like, he knew it's not like we were going to be best friends. It was just a really good guy willing to give me some advice. He just told me, put your question in the subject line of an email, and when I get to that email and I open it, I'll write you back. So from now on, it becomes just like this quick, like, hey, do you have a contact here? Hey, like, have you heard about this? Like, what do you think about this? So very, very specific, sort of like,
Mm-hmm.
versus can I pick your brain? And so I sort of took that. Once I talked with him, I got more specific in my asks, and I started messaging and going to networking events here in Charleston. And like I mentioned sort of at the top of the call that you also mentioned, Ashley, was like, Charleston is just really rich with women entrepreneurs who have all been in the same boat as us and are very willing to give their time. So people like Carrie Morey from Callie's Hot Little Biscuits, she was incredible. Stephanie Summerson Hall from Estelle Glass happens to live like one neighborhood over from me. A venture capitalist in my neighborhood during COVID, I couldn't even meet her because we weren't like engaging in like contact, but she
Yeah.
was like Facebook messaging me questions and then offered to get on a call with me. So I was not shy in making the asks after I talked to Jason, but the asks became a lot more specific of like, with Carrie, we talked about scaling a business into retail, right? Like it was
Yeah.
this Charleston Darling brand. It's a namesake, right? Like how did she sort of make her way into grocery? And from that, I left with, a contact at Publix, right? So
Wow.
these are just examples of like being really clear of like, I'd love to get coffee with you. My goal to come out of this is like X, Y, or Z, so that they walk into that meeting too, sort of knowing what your goals of the conversation are as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a couple people
So,
that were really helpful for sure in Charleston.
so much good there. I'll give you a lot of credit too, because I know there is luck, but I truly believe luck is where opportunity and preparedness meet. And you had an opportunity, but you were prepared when the opportunity met you. And I think that is incredible. And I think a cool success principle that really scales across just about anywhere. And I love what you said too about just not being afraid. I think we're kind of raised, or at least for me growing up in the South, it's like, maybe don't talk to strangers, be careful, but you really do just have to. I mean, what do you have to lose? You put yourself out there. You have to have, maybe a thicker skin and a soft heart to love people, but you're going to get rejections. You're going to get no's. People are not going to respond back to you. That's just people. And that's entrepreneurship. And you just maybe don't take it personally, like you said, but you just that one yes maybe unlock something that was really incredible for you in Charleston. But yeah, I agree. Charleston's a really special place to be a female entrepreneur. But I just wanted to hit that too. I think it was so cool that you said, like, just don't be afraid. Keep going, keep asking, keep showing up for you and your brand, and eventually you're going to get a yes. But I like that too. I think
And
entrepreneurs,
sorry.
no, go ahead.
Let's say the no's that you learn and how you deal with adversity early on sets the tone for how you're going to deal with it for the rest of the time, right? And
Mhm,
you are going to hear so many no's that you
mhm.
better get used to it quick.
Yes. Yes. And like you said too, entrepreneurs, I think time is such a precious resource that we have. So I love that. And Charleston, like I don't know that any different. I haven't been an entrepreneur in any other city necessarily, but people are willing to say yes. But I love what you said. Go into the meeting with a goal and not just, they do have a specific time frame. I know even a lot of times when we meet, it's like, okay, I have this time to this time. And we just get so much accomplished in those little mastermind sessions because you're there with a purpose, and things even spiral outside of that. And we have the next conversations. But I love that people are willing to help you, but also be specific in your ask. I think that is an awesome, awesome takeaway. Any
Yeah.
surprises or turns along the way for you? I know, like you said, different contacts maybe said yes, or alma maters that you weren't expecting, but maybe any twists or turns that have come along your journey for the positive or maybe the negative.
I'm really happy to highlight negative too, because I think people from the outside could just say, like, oh my gosh, rainbows and butterflies.
Mm-hmm.
Daysie is completely self-funded by myself. I
Awesome.
worked nights and weekends. I sold my Lily Pulitzers on Poshmark, right? Like
Yeah,
these were
that's
sort of like things that you have to, yeah. These are the sort of like mini sacrifices, right, that you're making. But like, so for me, because I didn't start with like a venture-backed company, money, right, is like the most critical resource that I have. And so it's really scary, of course, when it's on your own, and when you're doing something like this, and sort of mistakes that happen can be really expensive mistakes.
Yep.
And so I share this example because I'm actually like in the thick of this right now, which is that when thinking about your supply chain of ingredients or any piece of your supply chain, right, you sort of have to think about um, how the multitude of ways in which you could like accomplish this part of your supply chain. And so
Yep.
I use glass and not plastic with Daysie, and my glass is made in Italy, and that presents a whole world of problems, especially when we were in COVID and we didn't have container ships and there was a shortage. Um, and most recently, a supplier that I've been using for the very beginning sent the wrong glass to my bottling facility, and it wasn't caught, of course, until the day of the bottling. And so there I was in the middle of bottling in September, which was to sort of prep for the holiday season, so my busiest time of year, and they sent the wrong glass. And when I'm sort of managing two things at once, which is just like, okay, so what do we do with all the product that was just made because it's on the line ready to be bottled, and then what do I do to get the glass? And luckily my bottler is a very professional. I bet he has emergencies every day. And so we solved that problem. We were able to put it into like large containers. It's in holding and temperature controlled setting, but the glass is actually still not solved. So then when my rep got back to me, they said, well, we sent the wrong glass, but actually we don't even have the right glass in stock. We won't have it until December 15th. So then it just landed in the States. And then I have to contact my bottler, right? Because we're in the middle of the holidays.
Yep.
And so my bottler said, okay, great, we'll put you on the line January 15th. And so this is 4 months later, right, that all of this is happening when I should be actually bottling the next run. I'm one run behind. And what that caused was like an extreme shortage during the holiday season. So I was pretty quiet on social media. I was completely sold out of vanilla. And vanilla is one of the more popular flavors that sort of is in all of our trios.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have huge wholesale accounts that I wasn't able to fill because of the vanilla shortage. And so all of this is not just the cost, of just like the tangible reorders of these glass and all the things. It's also the opportunity cost. And
Sure.
so I sort of share that because your your role as a CEO or like the founder or whatever you want to call yourself, right? Like you are the solver. You're the only person that can solve these things. And my husband, I give him a lot of credit because he's very like calm. I think because he was on nuclear submarines, like when he goes through the decision making process, it's very like calm and it's very like directional, right? Like we need to move forward, and so here are the things that need to happen. And I'm very emotional,
Mhm.
but in watching him and sort of like leaning into that a little bit more, that's what I've sort of stuck to in this role, and I can separate that from like my personal like emotional self. At work, it's like my job is to solve these things, and so I just tell people that like there is something monumentally horrible that will go wrong. I can promise you that. And
Yep.
it will happen behind the scenes, and nobody will be the wiser because social media looks great and your website is still on and press is still happening. Uh, but you will be met with a lot of adversity, right? And a lot of like, oh my gosh, give up moments. Like, truly, can I
Mhm.
afford this? Can I emotionally afford this? Like, all of those moments. And so, you sort of there's no way to prep for it except for to just like acknowledge that it will happen,
Yes.
and to sort of figure out the mentality that you will go through that will like save you in the end, right? Like your emotional well-being, your sanity. And so for me, that was very much like you take the emotions off the table and you just work through the problem, and then the next problem comes up.
Yeah, so much good stuff there. I know it's like all we can control is our actions and our attitudes. And it's so cool to see. One of my mentors always talks about it looks like the entrepreneur roller coaster again is another good book, but sometimes it can feel like you're at a losing point, but you're actually in a winning story if you just keep going. I think sometimes when it gets hard, people quit versus if you just keep going, like it's going to go back up and you're actually going to have victory. And it'll be cool to hear whatever comes out of this on your story on the other side of like, maybe this wouldn't have happened if this, or maybe it just is one of those things, like you said, you and your husband got to work together as him helping you in your business and learn something cool as a couple. And that's a win too. So but thanks for sharing that. I think, yeah,
Totally, totally.
the Instagram and it's yours especially is beautiful. And so it's hard to remember on the backside of that. Maybe it's not always rainbows and daisies.
Exactly, exactly.
I love that. Well, wrapping up in starting to kind of close down, what are some things that you would share? And you've shared so many good things throughout our time together, but with someone who maybe wants to get into either the retail space, the grocery space, or just is inspired by your story, any pieces of advice or just entrepreneurial life that you would share on top of anything that you've already shared?
I think a couple of key things, which is it will take you 10 times more money and 10 times more time than you ever thought it would. Uh,
Hmm.
when you're first starting out, your dollars are flying off the shelves. And you think, well, once you start your product, like then the dollars stop flying off the shelves. But ideally, you're scaling, which is what you just said, Ashley. And so in a perfect world, you're making, 50 to 75% margin on a product, but then you go to scale and your next production run of whatever that is, right, is 2x or 3x, and you need the capital to be able to scale those things. And so I always just try to remind people that like it's just way more expensive than you probably ever thought it was going to be. Um, Number two, I think you have to like really be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I
So good.
just mean that in like just the moments that you're really unsure of. Like most of us probably have never done this before, unless you're
Mhm.
talking to somebody that's like, of course I've done this before. For most of us, first time entrepreneur, everything is uncomfortable because
Yep.
you just don't know what you're doing.
Yep.
And the comfort that I found in that was I have a I call it a business plan. And people are, I teach like an adjunct class once a semester at College of Charleston.
Yep.
And part of the deck that I share is like, do you need a business plan? And my answer is yes. And it's
Mhm.
not yes in like you need a formal one, though I'll touch on that after. You need like a brain dump. You need to have like done really hard exercises that make you uncomfortable. Like for me, branding and marketing comes really easily, but like money and finances don't. And so I
Mm-hmm.
had to bring in, professionals in these arenas in legal, right? And sort of learn from them, pay to learn from them and
Yeah.
retain that knowledge. And so I have a rolling Google Doc that has things like, um, you know, have the processes and procedures of things, the contacts of things, my margins, like Excel sheets. It also has, and I would really, really stress this to your audience or to anybody starting out. It is one thing to have an idea, and it is another thing to have a good idea. And you
Mm.
have to be so honest with yourself after doing the work if this is an actual good idea.
Wow.
Sometimes things don't exist because they shouldn't exist, right? Like somebody has maybe gone through that process before. And so with Daysie as an example, I spent a lot of time digging into, there's a plugin you can get for Amazon,
Okay.
and you can search through like volume and sales of products. And so I was able to go in and see like what is Tarani, that's the number one competitor for
Mm-hmm.
Daysie. What do they do on Amazon? I was
Mm-hmm.
able to read like Mintel reports, which is like annual grocery reports or surveys. What are consumer coffee trends? Like, do people
Mm-hmm.
are people frou at home coffee drinkers? And
Mm-hmm.
so I was learning things like over 60% of people are going to have one cup of coffee in their home every day. Gen X is certainly looking for sweeter components to coffee. There's a fourth wave sort of happen. Like I was able to find these things and to sort of, okay, like maybe I'm onto something. There's a market here. There's a company already making money. So if I got a percent of that, like what does that look like? And
Yeah.
so the business plan and that research phase really helped me identify if Daysie was a good idea. And then what also you have to like sort of separate is the finance side, and that is like your margins. So if you're making a tangible product, and you asked about grocery, which is sort of where this is leading, is grocery is incredibly expensive. It is, any grocery store is going to make more money off of your product than you are. It doesn't matter what your product is. It's like it's the way the beast works.
Got
You're
it.
hoping that the scale, right, the volume of grocery is getting your pennies into dollars. And so grocery and retail, everyone's like, well, it's incredibly expensive and it's incredibly difficult. So I would say I'm 2 years in and I have been chasing Whole Foods every single day. And I hear from them sometimes, and I don't hear from them sometimes, right? And I walked away from a Publix deal because I thought it was too expensive. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would just caution people to say that, like, grocery is not going to be your way in the beginning to rags to riches.
Sure.
You really have to think about like e-commerce right now, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean that just on your own website. I mean like Amazon as an e-commerce platform, Target.com, Walmart.com. These are
Yeah.
places people are shopping. So don't look at like retail and the physical as like the shiny object to be held. Yes, I want that, but I can like the capital it takes you to get into retail, unless you're walking in with like your millions of dollars right ahead of time.
Yeah.
You really have to start saving those pennies from your e-commerce sales to get you to be able to afford to get into retail. So Erewhon, this is just like Erewhon was my first retailer. And I launched there this summer, and Erewhon is very similar to many grocery stores, which is a pay to play model. So your first fill of product, however many come in a case, goes to every single store for free,
Mm-hmm.
and you pay a first time brand setup fee. Now after that, they pay, your wholesale pricing, right? But like they don't make any guarantees. You make it first past the first shelf life, or refill. And so it's quite a gamble, and Whole Foods is the same way.
Wow.
So you pay for these spots on retail, and it's very, very expensive.
That's eye-opening for sure. Now, this is kind of a random question that came to me. Just thinking through,
Yeah.
especially in the e-commerce space, I think people assume, myself included, that when you start something, like your family and all your friends, everyone's going to support you and it's going to be this like big wave. Was that your case, or are you looking for people? Obviously, you're scaling big scale, but immediately was it something where like all your stuff was flying off the shelves to friends and family and just buying, buying, buying? Or was it one of those things where you have overcome and you're like, okay, well, all those people that I thought were going to support me maybe aren't. So you kind of, again, going back to your previous comment, you have to get really vulnerable and really shameless early on to really build that network to know that it's going to keep flying off the shelf, or all your family may be stocked and they don't need any more right now.
Yeah, I will say, like, my friends definitely showed up for the first part, so very thankful for that. But the tipping point for Daysie, and this isn't something we talked about, was part of my shameless DMing, is that I personally, before starting Daysie, subscribe to every magazine that I like adore. So like in the food and beverage, like Southern Living, Food and Wine Magazine, Bon Appetit, like these are coming to my home every month. And
Mm-hmm.
so again, I'm like, you have to be like an expert in your field, and you have to, like, if you want press, you should be ordering every magazine. You should be looking at every single day the websites that you want to get on. And you should have this data dump of all the editors that are writing about things. And it sounds like work, and it is work, but this is like the work that's going to pay off. So what I did was I looked into all of those magazines that I just said, went on their websites, went into the magazines, wrote down the editors' names, found them on LinkedIn, found them in Instagram, read their articles, and then I
Mm-hmm.
would DM them and I would say, like, I saw you wrote about blah 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 blah. I was really engaged, like it really whatever, right? Like some
Yeah.
praise their way. And I think that this might match how you speak about other products. I'd love to introduce you to Daysie. And
Wow.
so I did that from the very, very beginning. And Southern Living picked up Daysie. I got a DM back that was like, the first DM back that was like, thanks so much for letting me know. We love, female founders in the South. We'll let you know should there ever be anything that arises. I was like, no problem. Would love to send you samples. Let me know. So very like casual, easy, sent her some samples. And like 2 weeks before publication of one of her articles in the magazine, I got a DM that said, if you can get me photos of Daysie on an all white background, I think I have a spot for you in the March issue of Southern Living. And I did not have those photos, but I said yes. And then, you make it happen.
Yeah.
And it ended up so 2 months after Daysie launched, it ended up in Southern Living magazine, which is pretty unheard of. So I don't want to like set the tone. Press is usually like a 6 month cycle. So like when I was in Food and Wine magazine, I found out in June and it wasn't even published until November. So like
Okay.
that's how long a typical news cycle lasts. But this particular editor for Southern Living always writes about new discoveries, and I knew that that was a column of hers, so that's how I pitched her. That's the
Mm-hmm.
column it ended up in. Maybe something dropped out, right? And she had just heard about me. So, all of that to say, the shameless DMing works, and it works just like it does with when you're emailing the entrepreneurs you want to talk with. Really, really specific. Like you admire their work, you saw something they wrote about. It's from I wrote them all from my personal account, not from Daisie's account, because I wanted them to just understand that I was a real person. And then that being said, I did that for a couple of months, and then I ended up hiring a PR firm. And I did that because I saw what once Southern Living hit, Ashley, I was like, I always tell people, entrepreneurs, when you're early in your journey, turn on, if you do it through Shopify, you can turn on this alert. And anytime you get an order, it's like ching, ching, like a little cash machine. And it felt so good to have cash coming in and not going out.
Yes.
And Southern Living really was like, it's a Bible of the South. Like, I mean, it really is. It's people read that and they say, this is what we believe too. And so they were a very incredible magazine. Not all print is created equal. You should know like your product, your audience, and what would do well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's how that worked. First myself, and then I saw the power of press, and then I hired a PR firm.
That's so good. There's so much good in there. I love the first of all advice of like actually read the stuff that you're going to reach out to people about. I feel like sometimes people just reach out, and if you haven't actually read the article or read their LinkedIn page or actually take the time to take the time, like you said, make the investment up front. If you're going to expect something in return, that's just as genuine and personal. Take the time up front. But I also love what you said about investing in yourself. You were willing to go ahead, and people I think sometimes see it as an expense, whereas entrepreneurs sees it as an investment. You got all these magazines, you had things
Mm-hmm.
coming to you. but really it was an investment back into your brand. So I think that's two
Totally.
really highlights right there. As we're winding down, any favorite Daysie recipes, any place where we can find you and keep our counters full of these amazing syrup? We want people to find you.
Yeah, I am a huge like cold foam person because we live in the South and we might get a couple of really cold days, but most of the time we are in the heat. And so I really use like a couple tablespoons of heavy whipping cream and a couple tablespoons of oat milk or almond milk. You need the heavy cream to get the thickness, and then whatever your milk choice is, and then a tablespoon of Daysie, and I will top an iced latte with that. So I whisk it. I have this handheld whisk that you can get on Amazon. They're like $10, and it really adds to the experience. I really love a cold foam. Like again, I would never knock Starbucks because I'm a Starbucks girly too. And it's the easiest at home. And then because we are still sort of in the holiday season, I mean we'll just have passed it, but the hack that I love for the holidays, so something to keep in mind for next year, is adding Daysie to your whipped cream for any sort of pies or icings. Is
Mm,
also just a great way to expand the coffee and occasions piece of Daysie. And so baking projects are a great way, once it's open, to sort of integrate. And then you can find Daysie online at enjoydaysie.com, Daysie. You can find it on Amazon. If you're in LA, you can find it at Air One. And then if you're local to Charleston, the Daily, which is my favorite coffee shop in Charleston, they always have all the flavors of Daysie. So would love for you to follow me. If you have questions, quick DMs of what the question is always great. I do manage all of our social media accounts myself. I don't create all of the content, but I manage them. So when you DM, you're talking to me.
that is awesome. Yes, I will link all that in the show notes and I can speak to every single flavor. They are incredible. And we just want to thank you for your time. I know you have a very big 2024 ahead, and we are so excited, hopefully, to have you back in the future and hear all the things that are happening, Daysie and personally. But yeah, anything else you want to share with our
Thank
listeners?
you. No, I mean, I would just say, like, if you have an idea, the best thing you can do is explore it, right? Like, to take those things that we talked about in today's show and to find out if you've got an idea or a good idea, right? And to have really honest conversations about the capital that you're willing to put into your idea, to this good idea, which I hope for you. But if ever I can be a resource, happy to help, and appreciate women like you, Ashley, who are putting the knowledge out there. It's exactly what we talked about at the beginning. So thank you.
Absolutely. So grateful. Well, thanks you guys. Thanks for hopping on this week. And feel free to follow on any place you're listening to podcasts. Give Daysie a follow, share this with a friend, and then we'll see you back next week for more Unlock Your Dream podcast. All done. Okay, friend, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for spending time with me. Feel free to share this podcast with another friend who it may inspire. Leave a review to possibly be featured at the beginning of another episode, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the stories that can help unlock your dream for you.